Well, there's no Liberal leadership race quite yet, but with the party under Justin Trudeau trailing badly in the polls, many in Ottawa have started to ask, is there anyone who could replace the Prime Minister and regain public support for the Liberals? Now, Abacus Data has been looking into that matter, and to talk to us about their findings, we're now joined by the company's founder, chair, and the CEO, David Coletto. David, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Good to see you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I'll get into the numbers in a bit, but first I want to talk about motivations here. What were your reasons for conducting this poll right now when really the Prime Minister continues to say he has no intentions of leaving before the next election?
Well, I think there were two reasons. One was we continue to see that, regardless of what the government does today, Canadians continue to tell us in our surveys they want change. They're not thrilled with the Prime Minister. They're not thrilled with the performance of the government. And so there's, wondering about who might, if anyone, replace him, and could that matter to how the Liberals do in a future election. But also, we had that story in the Globe about Dominic LeBlanc, the public safety minister, perhaps musing about running for leader. He's obviously denied that he is organizing, but his name being floated around added another name to my list, and wanted to see how do Canadians feel about those candidates or possible candidates, and which one would they prefer to be the next leader of the Liberal Party.
Okay, so you chose some names, posited them to people who are taking part in your poll. How did you come about reaching those names? Did you choose the ones that you thought were the most high profile, the most well-known? How did you come to that list?
Well, I think it was mainly from those that have been rumored to either be of interest or could be possibly good replacements for Mr. Trudeau. So obviously the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, has for a long time been talked about as a replacement. Mark Carney has been giving some speeches recently, and lots of discussion about his possible interest in the job and whether he would be popular or not. And then a number of the other high-profile cabinet ministers that again have been talked about. So I was just sort of listening to what folks in Ottawa and outside the city were thinking and saying, and it just sort of built a list that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's take a look at some of the results right now, beginning with who might be a good replacement for the Prime Minister, preferred replacement, as you put it in your poll. And what's interesting here is that 54% of respondents were unsure, but of those that had an opinion, walk us through some of the findings here.
Yeah, so it's a good first point is that half of Canadians said, I don't know who would be a good replacement if the Prime Minister were to step down. But clearly, Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney would be top tier kind of possible replacements right now. Chrystia Freeland at 13%, Mark Carney at 11%. And then Mélanie Joly, François-Philippe Champagne, Dominic LeBlanc, Sean Fraser, and Anita Nunn all are in the low single digits. So none of them really have all that much traction. But that being said, even the highest profile, the most well-known of these possible leadership candidates is Chrystia Freeland, and she is barely ahead of Mark Carney. And I think it really shows how wide open a race to replace Justin Trudeau would be with the broader public. Now, keep in mind, Canadians as a whole don't get to select the next leader of the Liberal Party. You'll have to, either be a member or a supporter, depending on how the party ultimately decides a future race. But it does show that none of these candidates right now really have an overwhelming amount of support among the public, and most Canadians actually just shrug their shoulders and say, I'm not sure.
Okay, most Canadians shrug their shoulders. Let's bring in another board here, because that's the top line. You also went looking for how much of a positive view participants had about other prominent Liberals. Walk us through those numbers, because I think that seems to very much buttress what you just told us about no one really owning this race.
Yeah, and again, you look at these numbers with Chrystia Freeland having is the most well-known candidate. Fewer people say they don't know her or they don't have an opinion of her than any of the others. Mark Carney comes second on that, but you can see that each of them has some positive impressions, but not a whole lot, right? Even the Deputy Prime Minister, who's been, I would say, the most high-profile cabinet minister in the Trudeau government, she just has 21% have a positive view. In fact, more people have a negative view of Chrystia Freeland than a positive one. Mélanie Joly, who's had a very high-profile role as our foreign affairs minister, involved in many issues related to some of the conflicts in Europe and in the Middle East. She's more well known than some of our other cabinet colleagues, but even there, not a whole lot of positive impressions. And so when I look at those numbers, again, this is among the general public. The conclusion is that none of them, except perhaps for Ms. Freeland, have much profile at all. And so if, let's say, the Prime Minister announced tomorrow he wasn't running again and a leadership race quickly took shape, most, if not all of these potential candidates that we tested in our survey, the first step would be having to introduce themselves to Canadian, and that means both there's an opportunity, that there's a blank slate for them to fill in, but also a risk in that others, like the Conservatives, can shape public perceptions around whoever might become the next leader and Prime Minister.
Okay, so some opportunity, as you say, for potential runners. But I'm wondering then, given the pitfall that you outlined, is that some good news then for the Prime Minister? Because if people are uncertain about potential successors, does that bolster the argument that Trudeau is still his party's best known commodity and therefore his party's best asset?
I think it does to some extent. I mean, it's a question of risk in my mind, right? That the risk for the Liberal Party and for the Prime Minister is very clear. People know who the Prime Minister is. They have very clear views on him, and I think it's going to be hard for him, as we've seen, to try to change the public perception of him personally. But the risk on the other end is that likely whoever replaces him won't be well known. Maybe after a leadership race that might change, and so we're just measuring where the kind of start of public views of these candidates might be. But there is a lot of risk that at the end of the day, the Liberals select somebody that many Canadians don't know very much about, and so they'll have to actually spend a lot of time introducing themselves when we know that next election isn't that far away. So the real question is, what's riskier? An unknown potential replacement or a well-known and right now unpopular leader in Mr. Trudeau that the party and Mr. Trudeau himself obviously has to determine what's best for him and for the party going forward.
Well, some very interesting things to consider. David Coletto, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael.